any organization that's not founded by an international treaty. The UC Atlas on Global Inequality says it's a term used for various organizations that are not part of the government, particularly those focusing on development, environment, and human rights. The term is not usually used for a corporate enterprise nor for a religious institution. And then it goes on to saying that the term is unsatisfactory because it talks about such a diverse group area and because basically defines what something is not. That is to say, it's not government rather than what it is. The World Bank makes the same sort of story, but says there are basically two major categories of NGOs: operational NGOs, whose purpose is to design and implement development-related projects, and advocacy NGOs, which I'll be talking about today, whose primary purpose is to defend or promote a specific cause, in particular cause related to human rights. And we could, there's a book edited by a man named Claude Welch, W-E-L-C-H, called NGOs and Human Rights, which I recommend you if you want to follow this up. And he sums it up: have traditionally concentrated their efforts on the three crucial areas: working with or against governments and developing agendas for action, in standard setting, that is to say, establishing international norms for state behavior, which we've been talking about, creating legally binding treaties and so forth. These organizations prepare and provide information about abuses. They lobby officials. They provided direct assistance to human rights organizations. So it's a very broad category of organizations, as you see, that all sorts of other international organizations are interested in and work with and through. Right? But what I want to talk about, I want to emphasize today is this: that the Organization of International Civil Society. You study 18th century history, 19th century history nationally, and you learn about the development of civil organizations, clubs, religious groups, all these things that aren't the state, through which we live most of our lives: your fraternities, your sororities, your sports clubs, all the places where you guys live. So what I want to talk about today then is the creation of this international civil society, or national civil society that aims to operate in an international arena. And it's not engaged in commerce, so I don't mean multinationals. And it doesn't want to be part of the government. That is, it's not seeking to overthrow a government or to become part of a government itself. It advocates and provides resources, in our particular case, human rights NGOs, to achieve human dignity as broadly articulated in the Universal Declaration. So what I'm talking to you about today is the creation of international civil society, right, which is dedicated to furthering, in a variety of ways, these principles of the Universal Declaration. And what I want to suggest then to you is that that building on what I want to suggest is a longer historical tradition, the story today then is this thickening of this human rights interest in activism, the making of international human rights culture out of old material and out of new hopes. That's my theme. Is there any question? It's a lot of abstract stuff. Question? You're a little puzzled? No? Yes?
Well, I have a question about the slides before it. The person, the Yugoslav scholar, in which era did he live in?
Which era?
Yeah, like.
Oh, I'm sorry. He was a member of the commission of the commission organized, the Economic and Social Commission drafting the Universal Declaration. And it makes a principled objection to why the Eastern Bloc didn't abstain from it. That was my point. A radical version of this, but that's what really represents these poles of a liberal Jewish humanist on the one hand, and a communist philosopher, diplomat on the other hand. I mean, I was giving you stark extremes of these two people. Okay? All right, so let's go on to, this in some sense will be a review. So I've been talking to you for a bit as the course goes along, with more or less detail about the creation of some of these international organizations. And so while we didn't speak specifically about the Anti-Slavery International in 1839, we did talk about national anti-slavery societies. And these national anti-slavery societies got together in 1839 with the purpose of advocating for international treaties against slavery and for the enforcement of these treaties, and for pressuring the 19th century governments to eliminate slavery. In that sense, they were by and large successful. By the 1880s, all the governments of the world had abolished slavery. Organizations still, or versions of this organization still exist today to combat what are essentially slave-like but not chattel slavery itself in many parts of the world. And I know some of the students who were involved in starting this human rights course were involved in last year's Valentine's Day project of selling slave-free chocolate, which developed finding chocolate that hadn't been raised by indentured children and had been grown in an ethically responsible way. It's an example of a version of this trickling down to Berkeley in a very sort of local forms of activism. And we're trying to do it again. The human rights, some of the people in the human rights minor are going to do this again this year. So you'll get word, and maybe you want to participate. So there are many more of these. But I just want to remind you, we talked about the Congo Reform Association, a group of people in different countries pushing, demanding a reform of Leopold's regime in the Congo. They did succeed, as you remember, in kicking out Leopold. They did not succeed, obviously, in decolonizing the Congo. And there's a fascinating article in the Times Today, which in the Science Times, which alludes to this. So do you know how many people, after Belgium finally left the Congo in the 1960s, how many college-educated Congolese there were? 30. Astonishing. So who ran the Congo? The Congo was then run by educated Haitians. About 5,000 Haitians came to the Congo. I just learned, because they spoke French and they were educated, and that's how this article, the hook of this article was about the spreads of the AIDS virus. That's how AIDS gets to Haiti, which starts the story. But the fascinating part for me was just the notion that it succeeded in part one, the Congo Association, made the worst depredations. It did not resolve the second set of. In any case, so there's a Congo Association, and I recommend the Science Times to you. Well, there's a whole array of women's organizations and other international organizations I just want to point to. One is the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. It was founded by an American woman named Jane Addams, you might have heard of, who was very important in the settlement house movement in Chicago. But she worked with, and again, this speaks to the international civil society part, with important Dutch and German feminists in particular. And they were active on the world stage. They opposed the harsh, revenge-like aspects of the Versailles Treaty. They were peace activists. They supported the League of Nations and supported American entry into the League of Nations. They were interested in disarmament. In any case, they formed a sort of part of this international world of politics, which lobbied for these sorts of causes, which then end up being in the UN charter. And there's an interesting one that sort of falls at the periphery of this group, but I think I want to point it out to you because, again, it speaks at the thickening of this culture. So that's the Rotary. Did you guys ever heard of the Rotary Club? Rotary Club scholarships? Yeah? In what context? Sorry? You did a piece for them? You wrote a piece? A piece? A speech at one of their events. I do have my hearing aids then. You did a speech for them. Well, the Rotary Club went, I suspect in the generation of your father, maybe your grandfathers, was a big deal in America as a sort of local civic club. And the club starts in the in the early 20th century. It becomes international after the war, and what it tried to do was create ethics in business, and sort of a golden rule among its members. But the important part, it claimed to be doing this internationally as well. So you're meant to apply these ideals in your personal business and community life, and you were supposed to apply it to creating world fellowship, peace, and goodwill. And in fact, then, they did have organizations all over Europe, and some of them actually resisted fascism. Some of them caved. So there's an interesting story to be told about this Rotary Club in Germany resisting the Nazi proposals or insistence that they kick out members who had been Freemasons and members who were Jews. Some did and some did not. The Rotary Clubs were eliminated in Eastern Europe in 1945 and they came back in 1990. So here's another sort of part of this international American civic organization which goes national. And what they do internationally is provide scholarships for foreign students. So they actually did bring thousands, probably tens of thousands of people here. There are 32,000 clubs in 200 countries right now. So again, they're part of, maybe the least political part of, this world of NGOs, which ranges from the very political, as we'll talk about, to the not so political, like the Rotaries. Okay, so this is all before the First World War. There's an expansion of these in the interwar period, and I can just point to you some of them that still exist. One is the Save the Children Fund, which starts in England in 1919, and it begins with a very political point. It begins with trying to pressure the British government to lift the blockade against Germany, which had been put in place in 1919 to force the Germans to pay the reparations, which they had promised, start forcing them to start paying the reparations, which they had claimed to be, which they had signed on to. And it was a terrible blockade, and people really were starving in Germany as a consequence of this campaign. So it was a real political stand against what was pretty clearly an infringement of the rules of war, in the sense that this is a blockade after war had ceased, in order to compel some company to pay money. So it starts as a really political gesture. The British government, whether through pressure or not, stops doing this, and the campaign turns in other directions. Now again, it's interesting what kind of person starts this. The woman who starts it is named Eglantine Jebb, G-E-B-B. She studies history at Cambridge, one of the very first women's intellectuals, women students in the university. She gets engaged in what's sort of scientific charity, that is to say, an organization which try to deal with charity, not just handing it to beggars, but doing something systematic and therefore more effective. She gets engaged in writing about the social question, which she actually calls the social question, with its French revolutionary heritage, and writes books on this sort of subject. She's against the First World War. She sneaks in foreign newspapers into Germany and into England and translates them so people will have a sense of what the rest of the world is like. And then after the war, she found